have a distinguished keynote speaker, Gordon Freedman. He is the founder and vice chair of the National Laboratory for Educational Transformation. It is located in California, USA. And also he is serving as a strategic advisor to Go Educate and other institutions. This firm is working as a consultation firm and research institution. So, Gordon, you are more than welcome to deliver your keynote speech for today. The platform is yours.
Tazir, thank you very much. Hello, attendees. I'm very happy to be here today. I wish I were there in Istanbul with you all. I'm based in California, about 100 miles south of San Francisco, near the coast in Monterey. And today I'm going to be talking mostly about things that are going on in the United States, but these are probably applicable in many different ways in many different locations. I'm assuming you can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Is that correct? All right. So I wish I were with you in Istanbul, but next year I will join you wherever you are. Thanks. All right. So the National Laboratory for Education Transformation, I formed this in 2012 after having served at Blackboard, the education technology company, for almost 10 years, because I felt the technology in education was not moving at the same pace it was in the rest of society. And most importantly, I felt that individual learners were not given the tools to be able to learn not just at one institution, but at many places in many ways that they need to. In the United States, as you know, we do not have a national education system. So we have many, many institutions. Some work well, some not so well. So the idea of stepping back and having a national laboratory for, say, human capital or education transformation seemed to make sense. And in our 10 years or so of work, we have focused on looking at how we can have parity between the technologies we use every day, whether it's Google or whatever you use to find your airline and hotel, or however you do your commercial banking. You're going to the web to do that. It's very accessible to you. Unfortunately for learners, it's not so accessible. If I'm part of an institution and I'm getting a degree, I log on to that institution, but I don't have the support of the general web. At the same time, people are gathering credentials in many, many different ways. We, value historically the diploma, and we also today are collecting credentials. Some people are getting skilled in certain career work. At the same time, they're getting an academic degree. So NLET, that's the acronym for the National Lab. We also incubate technologies that we see in other companies, in other nonprofits, and in government, and with the help of government agencies. So we've had financing here from the Gates Foundation, from the National Science Foundation in the US, and the Department of Labor to look at these issues. We're a small boutique operation, but we're there in one sense for the student, the learner, and we're also in some ways answering a question that's coming up in the United States quite a bit, since we don't have occupational tracks and academic tracks. People here are often confused, which direction do I go? There's so much work available in the United States right now. It's hard to know where to get trained for that and whether you should also be getting an academic degree. So one of the companies that we have supported is a company called Go Educate. And this was brought to my attention. Again, in the States, we have these large community college campuses and systems, in the California Community College System, which is a 2-year associate's degree on the way to a bachelor's degree or on the way to an occupational track, introduced me to this company that had been working for several years on a web scale, almost like an Amazon, where you could connect people, learners, job seekers, whatever they might be, educators and education institutions, and careers, jobs and careers. So this hasn't happened before because it's very difficult to work with data about people, data about educators, and then the job data. In the United States, we have large job boards like Indeed and others where the jobs are flowing, but many people don't know, where would I go to get qualified for that job? How would I compete for it? And I'll talk about Go Educate a little bit more, but just to say this, that the marketplace in Go Educate, let me just get there, allows for learners to be able to connect to different pieces. And we'll talk about this in a second. All right, for my talk today, the question is, what has COVID done to education? What are the changes that we might be seeing? So one of the things I'm going to talk about is that the COVID-related shocks to higher ed were the result of going remote, which is very different than online, because all of a sudden, as you all know, we had to remotely administer our institutions and courses and programs. So this was a very different world. We thought it all would be temporary, and of course, it has not been temporary. And when something happens long enough, patterns begin to shift, cultural patterns, individual patterns, and institutional patterns. I was in Washington, D.C. Last week at a large organization here, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is a building close to our White House. It probably could hold 500, 600, 700 people. The marble building, I walked through it and maybe there were 25, 30 people there. And they were confused, do people come back to work or not? So in higher education, we've been returning in bits and pieces, but it's not the same. The disruptions in many ways were permanent. And the question is that a good thing or a bad thing? Are there good things that are coming out of this disruption? The other thing is that, at least here in the States, the pandemic intersected with a push here to be far more inclusive in higher education, to deal with diversity, which is a constant issue, and equity. So these issues were already underway. The pandemic made it worse in many ways because people who were disadvantaged by culture or finance might not have had the ability to get online as easily. In the United States, there are still plenty of places where bandwidth is not available or it's very expensive. So the impact sped up what we deal with in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equity. The result of the pandemic, which I'm sure everybody's been talking about in one form or another, is that now there are multiple configurations of education, of training and flexibility. There's not a lot of guidance on how to use these multiple configurations, but they're there. The other thing that happened again in the US, and I'm assuming in places elsewhere, is that the disruption led to pressure for education to connect with employment outcomes. Now, these have been, clashing issues in the United States because we don't have separate tracks for occupation and academics. So the question in our institutions is, if you step away from a liberal arts bachelor's degree or a master's degree into PhD program, and you react to pressure from employers, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, certainly people need to make money. Certainly in the United States, there's a lot of flexibility. Somebody could earn a certification to be a data entry person at the same time they're getting their degree, because without national education financing, it's very expensive to attend our institutions. So the conclusion in my talk and what I'm going to be speaking about is new organizational methodologies to look at higher ed institutions, and then responsive technologies to look at how individuals and institutions and employers can be more involved. I'm glad to say that within days, or it might even happen today, this new book is coming out, and it's called Using ROI for Strategic Planning of Online Education. ROI is a business term, return on investment, that's been used by corporations and even nonprofits for a long time to see if their dollars are delivering, or their currency are delivering results and outcomes. The organizers for this book, which has just been published, Kathleen Ives and Deborah Seymour, wanted to look at whether there could be new models of looking at return on investment, not just in financial sense, but how would ROI relate to being more efficient on a campus or an institution for students, for the institution itself, and how it spends its money, and also where will this take us in the future, which has a lot to do with being mobile and having the flexibility I spoke about before. So this book is just coming out. There were a number of authors for it in the US. The foreword by Paul LeBlanc. He runs Southern New Hampshire University, which is one of the more successful online institutions. And although in this book we concentrate on online education, we're going to be using this as a model for other forms of education, since going forward, most of education is going to be both online, in person, and a mix of the two. So this book will be available, and we can put links up for it shortly. My chapter has to do with ROI, or return on investment, in the wake of a natural disaster or pandemic. So as a result of COVID, as we all know, the world of training and education has not changed into one new thing where we're just all online or all back in the old form, but it's a variety of modes. And this is very different for many traditional institutions. And again, the connection between education and equal access to education has led to deeper demands here to connect to employers. And again, I don't know the situation elsewhere, but there are so many available jobs in the United States that it is very hard for employers of any sort, including institutions, by the way, to be able to hire people, and to hire people that are qualified for what they're doing. So I took the opportunity of thinking about pandemics and thought, well, why don't I look back in history and see what we can learn? And it was a guess on my part that there was disruption as a result of the bubonic plague and the on and off over centuries of the plague. And I really had no idea what I was going to find. And what I found was a very rich literature that I think unbelievably connects directly to our world today. So the pandemics occurred, early bubonic plague occurred when higher education was very much tied to doctrine in the Catholic Church, at least in Europe. And as a result, going through several of the pandemics, things changed. The hold of the church, which maybe could not explain why so much death had occurred, began to look at what causes might be, what things were happening. Sciences began to emerge, and there was a return to the use of the classics. So it was very interesting. And then late in the plague, at Cambridge University, which had to clear out, there was a great story about Newton, who felt quite relieved. Isaac Newton felt quite relieved because he enjoyed the solitude of being at home and was very productive. And I thought, well, this is interesting because maybe there's a lesson in here. Maybe this being on campus, being online, being able to have time to reflect and live a life, maybe that leads to something. If Isaac Newton had not gone home during that pandemic, perhaps we wouldn't have gotten the calculus he developed. And then the return to the classics and humanistic ideals, again, sort of countervailing the church, but also the beginning of printing being much more like today, being the distribution method, the rise of the Protestant Reformation, which used a seminar method for, that's where seminars come from, type of teaching began to cement in the education we have. But there also were far-reaching effects when society gets to reorganize itself after such a pause in daily life. So I think it's good for all of us to meditate a little bit on what this timeout's meant for us, because it is an opportunity to think about things differently. And we all know that every successive younger generation comes at the world looking at it in very different ways. So I see an arc in our situation where the opening to giving more rights and more access to individuals in partnership with institutions and online learning and training is very important. And not that we want consumerism for individuals, but we do want that rights and access. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Now, in terms of the concepts for ROI, what I did and what this book does is it looks at three levels of return on investment. So certainly good institutions are looking at the question of whether what they're financing it allows them to sustain themselves. And again, whether that institution is funded by the government, or it's funded in part by the government, or it has to be funded primarily on tuition, the question of returns aren't strictly financial anymore. They have more to do with the quality of what's being provided, the mix of what's being provided, and then institutional purpose and programming. The academy, as we all know, has been organized by faculty and into disciplines. But then there's the broader question of institutional purpose, of what is being provided beyond the instruction and the degree attainment. And then finally, the student value, which I'm going to return to again when we look at the type of technology and education, the equity and access, and what types of records or data are available to say, what's working well. So I'm going to give a brief talk about each of these. And when I chose this form of analysis to look at purpose, finance, and value, there could have been other ways to look at the institutions. But I think in terms of perspective gathering, this one might be useful, but I'm not suggesting at all that these three are the only three or make complete sense. So there are three separate trends that I saw. All of a sudden, again, I can only speak to our experience in the States and probably Canada, was that the purpose of being educated in the middle of the pandemic was hard. It put pressure on institutions, not just to say you're going to get a certificate or degree or diploma, but what is this for? Why am I putting this time and energy in? The institutions themselves had to deal with the fact that they were paying for physical campuses, at the same time scrambling to get the right infrastructure in place technologically. And then the question came up, is the value being delivered? And we have to remember that the people that get to attend full liberal arts institutions globally are very lucky. I mean, it's a small portion of the population that has this access. And we oftentimes in the higher education world are not completely aware of who gets this access and who doesn't. It's a tremendous benefit to have it. What happens if you don't have it? So I'm going to start with return on purpose. So students, employers, and governments desire higher education to be responsive to student career goals and employer needs. Now, again, in Europe, there's been an ability to separate these tracks. In the United States, it's very confusing because, let's say, a state university, it could be the University of Massachusetts, University of California, University of Michigan. Students attending there, in many cases, especially if parents are paying for the tuition or they're on a scholarship, there's a question of what they're going to be able to do with that education. We know statistically that a general liberal arts education will lead to higher higher salaries 10 years or more out from being in the institution. It will not answer the question of what that person does when they get a general degree the year after they graduate or 2 years after they graduate. So there's tremendous pressure to be able to get into the job market again here and think about being able to buy a house or a car or pay back a student loan. And remember, our students, many of them are carrying the burden of loans. So the pressure to find the purpose out of an institution is very, very important. Now, the other way I look at purpose is that in our institutions as well, especially I'm going to speak about the big state institutions. And remember, they're only getting part of their financing from the state or the federal government. This has shrunk since the Cold War. So those institutions need to be able to sustain themselves. They're not making it just on tuition alone or the state money. So they look for other methods. Often there are continuing ed operations. We call them extensions. They could be university colleges, which are offering professional degrees and professional certification along with full degree programs. So the idea of a purpose of a large institution is more than just that academic degree. And so balancing that inside the institution has never been clear of who does that and how that gets decided. But it's an issue that's on the table here in many of our institutions. The return on finance, again, it would be certainly to many faculties, it would be a dangerous thing to be able to say, is this U.S. history course worth its value? Now you can't put a dollar and cents value on fine history courses, and they will play a role in judgment and perspective later in life. But the ability to take a look at what is being offered from that institution and look at it in terms of a full portfolio is something that's happening. Now, the traditional institutions here are not very anxious to have these conversations. But we have very active online institutions that are challenging that premise. So does a traditional state institution or even a private institution here bend a little bit to pick up what essentially is the market of online education institutions that are, many of which are doing quite well? So again, there's robust choice in the US. There are going to be fewer institutions in the future. The ones that adapt and can deliver the highest level of academic education at the same time that they're offering job capable education and training is going to be very important. And I think that our institutions are going to be measured in time over how well they manage this mix or portfolio, if you will, of offerings. Now, in terms of students, this is a large issue in the United States. We have many disenfranchised populations by culture, race, and finance. And again, we're facing a situation where we need as many employees as we can get across the country. So it creates a situation where before it was simply equity that was driving inclusion. Now we actually need people working, and it's an interesting situation of how do we provide that value. We have some disturbing trends in the United States. Young males are not attending and completing college or university at the same rate as females are. There are issues in retaining students in colleges. When I hear the term retention, it really bothers me because that's an institutional, almost selfish impulse to keep their classes filled. On the other hand, I'm wondering why the introspection doesn't lead to a deeper understanding of what those students need and how to service them. And when we talk about technology in a minute, there are plenty of technologies tell us whether our students are showing up, whether they're doing well, etc. But there are very few situations where the students brought into the equation. And I don't know about you, but being around young people today, they're very capable, almost at any level, they're capable. And yet, when we face them as institutions, we tend to discount that. We, as faculty members, might do an excellent job, but as institutions themselves, often there's very little guidance, and it's hard to figure out at a high level how we take care of students. So I'm going to leave the ROI drivers, and this is a conversation we can have at the end of the call or the end of the session, or I'm happy to do it in email. This notion of return on value or return on investment is not clear. It's still a metaphor in my mind, but at least it takes the place of just thinking, oh, what do we program this year? How many sections are we putting on of philosophy? How many, whatever it might be, is there a pattern that might change the same way it did as a result of the previous pandemics? All right, as this talk is divided, one part of it is about this reorganization on campus. The other part about it is considering the technologies that campuses and institutions consume. I've spent a better part of my life since 1998 looking at education technology, being involved in it, and then finally believing that it's causing problems in many ways. So when I talk about technology, I'm talking about education technology that institutions buy. And I'm also talking about the structure of online learning and the programs that are provided for that. These continue to live in their own world, separate and apart from daily life on your phone, in apps, on the web, and disconnected in many ways from what people are doing to be employed. So this quote from Gary Miller: "We're in a period of rapid technological change, but our social institutions change much less rapidly than does technology." Well, we all know that. Question is, what can be done about it? How could we look at it in a different way? This makes it critical that institutions consider all aspects of innovation so that they can move more effectively to adapt as technology evolves. Gary Miller ran this organization at the university, at Penn State University, called the World Campus. And they were early on one of the large providers globally of online learning. And again, online learning here, and maybe elsewhere, has been seen as another modality for education. We can be online. We can be in a hybrid class. We can be in class all by itself with some technology. But online itself has never been understood more deeply in terms of, is it a change or is it just simply an extension of what we've done before? And this is an important question, because online education has an ability, because it's online, because there's data, because there's interactions between people that might be much deeper than what would happen on a campus. Are we understanding it deeply enough? And I would say we're not. And again, the book we all worked on looks at some of these issues of online learning and trying to decode it or understand it more deeply than something that's simply a different modality, an electronic modality. So what I look at, and going back to why I formed the nonprofit, the education lab that we spoke about before, is that I wanted to see how common culture, everyday culture of people, everyday culture of employers and employees could square in the future with how campuses and institutions operate. Because the great knowledge and human capital development that we have, if it's walled off in its own world, it's very hard in a very ultra-connected world to have these things work together. So I've analyzed three kind of ways to think about technology on campus and off campus. So first of all, in the first category, we all live on and off the web and in apps. Many of us have individual accounts for many things, for shopping, for banking, for travel. These are controlled by you, the owner. There's no counterpart to this in education. If I'm at a university, I have an email login. I probably, unfortunately, have to log into 3 or 4 other technologies, none of which know who I am. So in today's world, identity is really important in the online world. There is no sense of identity electronically on a campus. The way the registrar systems work, their numbers assigned to people, their courses and grades are recorded. But that system, that whether it's a registrar system or what we call a student information system, it knows nothing about the student. It has a name and an ID number. That data may be sent somewhere else to analyze whether that student has performed, whether they've stayed in class and so forth. Generally, that student information ID number is shared with something called a learning management system, which is the daily electronic face of an institution. They don't know the learner. It's just absolutely the learner is anonymous. And if that learner happens to be getting technical training in one institution and academic training and development in another, they'll be seen as 2 different people. The second area is the reason we can go to these large websites or apps and do things is because there are full cloud solutions. And what does that mean? That means that every one of us that has an individual learning account or an individual account of something else, our data is flowing into a system, and that system's adapting to be able, hopefully, to provide better services back. But full cloud solutions don't have anything to do with campuses. They are outside, and I'll show this in a minute. And then again, for people that are looking to be employed and employers, the job market has no connections to the academic world. There may be offices for career planning. There may be offices in regions that have councils where there's closer alignment, but it's very, very, very loose. So as I was talking before, this is the world I see. Now, many people don't go along with me, or they get confused by what I'm talking about. So every day we live in this red block online. We're doing all sorts of things. In this country, there are numerous ways to prepare for graduation from high school, to prepare for college, to actually get apprenticeships now and internships. All of that's going on, has nothing to do with the campus, although the campus in many ways could be involved with that activity. Some of our community and technical colleges are. The blue band at top is the open web. And many things are going on there. And as all of us know, that if we're preparing a lecture or we're a student preparing a paper, we're on and off the web all day long. And we're using some of the resources available from campus, but we're picking and choosing all over. Certainly, we're aware as individuals and students of where our career might go, where our jobs might be. That's entirely separate from what goes on at campus. I was surprised. I was hired, or we were hired at the nonprofit to have conversations with our large state institutions in the United States. And I'm a graduate of Michigan State University in Lansing, Michigan, which is a huge campus, 60,000 students. It's sitting in one of the heaviest manufacturing areas in the world, with Detroit automaking and aerospace and all sorts of other things. And I asked the question, does Michigan State know where their students end up working? And the answer there, and almost any other of our large universities, is no, we have no idea. At Michigan State, it turned out there was one individual that tracked this and tried to get the administration at the campus to think about where their people are being hired. So when I go back to that, the purpose driver, the ROI purpose driver, it may be quite useful to know where your students are ending up. Now, in top fields, where do the physicists go? Where do the top computer scientists go? Well, the famous ones, that institution knows, and they make a big deal about it. But otherwise, it's not. So we in the campus, starting in the late 90s, when the web was just coming into existence, we also realized that campuses were vulnerable. They could be hacked. So systems that were in place before, maybe in ledgers and maybe in floppy disks later, were turned into full products that are web-based. They may be in the cloud, but they're not open to the cloud. So learning management solutions like Blackboard or Campus, other programs, Canvas and others that we use here, these are just sold to campuses. They do not have any connections to the individual once they leave the institution. They have no connection to who might be hired. Campuses worldwide have been hiring customer management solutions called CRM solutions to see how many different interactions a student or learner or even faculty might have with the institution. There are registrar systems, there are online courses, there are course catalogs. None of these things exist on the web. You can get them through the website of the institution, but they have little to do with that. And then below this, there are all sorts of technology tools that everybody uses all day. Faculty use them, students use them. Again, they're not connected to the world that we know. So I want to make sure that this is something that we look at in the States and in the work of our nonprofit. We've taken this model of what does the individual get, how active is the cloud in the solution, and how would any of this relate to somebody getting a job. So what I'm going to show you now are 4 or 5 companies that we work closely with, including GoEducate, that are solving some of these problems and confronting the traditional management of campuses. So the first one is GoEducate. And this company was developed over 5 years with one investor. With one investor who answered the question that many people have here. Since we have such diversity of education and training in the United States, when your son or daughter is getting ready or a relative's getting ready to think about college or what happens after our secondary education, there's no place to go. I mean, they can go to hundreds of websites of colleges. They can go to hundreds of what we have called workforce boards. They can go look at the job market, but there's nothing that will help them plan, or like any other web tools that young people are used to, or adult learners who are coming back to be retrained, there's no one place to go. So GoEducate is a marketplace for the connection of education and training to employment. And what do they have? So they have a full learner record. There's a lot of discussion about LERs, learner education records. Most of these are formed in a blockchain, but there's a question about in the future, somebody may have 3 or 4 different electronic learning records. Where do they put them? And then GoEducate doesn't exist on a campus. It actually exists outside of campus, and it's cloud friendly, it's web, it's mobile, and it has connections to the job market. How does it do this? So what they're doing is, this particular college is in Texas. That's called Odessa College. And it's a community college. So they have training for all these different occupations here. And each one of these occupations that you're looking at in the health field are in high demand. There is no way that there are enough people for those jobs, especially as our population gets older and the number of young people is smaller than it would have been for the baby boom generation. So what happens with GoEducate, if you clicked on one of these, and I'm not going to do that today, but I'm happy in the future to make connections for people to see this. If I took surgical technology, it would take me to the college programs and courses that were connected to that specialty. It would also immediately bring in the jobs that are available in that area. And eventually it will be able to tell me, is this job, if I go through this program, am I likely to get work? In some cases in the United States, There are people that are guaranteeing work if somebody sufficiently finishes one of these programs. So Go Educate operates this marketplace. It coordinates with the colleges, it coordinates with the employers, but most importantly, it gives a record to that learner that they can hold on to for the rest of their lives if they want. So that's Go Educate. And that's one that we've helped get going. And I'm playing a role in helping to move that along. This is an example of a blockchain records system. So this one called Greenlight is in Texas. The person who developed it originally came from India, was one of the first people in the United States building online content for the education marketplace. He evolved into running a very interesting learning management system that a company Barnes & Noble bought. And then he began to think about, how do I put power? And again, like Go Educate, this happened by a father thinking about, where does his son's records go? Where do they go? Where can he keep records over a lifetime that he can share with, if he's in high school, that he could share with a college, or he could share with an employer or later in life. So this is a blockchain, meaning that an individual had a full learning record that they own. They can put into that record a variety of credentials. Those could be certificates, they could be badges, they could be full degrees. So in this particular case, it's fully set up for the learner. And across Texas, many high school students are getting these while they're in high school, so they can be aware of the credentials they've earned, and they can show their transcripts to universities when they're applying for those universities. This product is cloud and web enabled. It sits separate from a campus. And now a campus may decide that their students should use this blockchain, but when that student leaves, let's say the University of Texas, Austin, they still have this system. When somebody leaves another institution, they do not have their learning management Blackboard or anything else. They don't go away with anything electronically. And I don't know about the rest of you on this call, but I still have 2 boxes that seem very important to me, with my most important college and university records in them, and my notes and a few other things. Well, these aren't available to people. So this is a very interesting system. There will be more than one of these. There are a number of these that are coming along. One of the reasons that Go Educate is interesting is that it could hold this Greenlight blockchain, but it could hold others as well. So this, and again, we've chosen at the nonprofit, at NLET, companies that we think meet these criteria, that they take care of the learner, cloud enabled and app enabled, and eventually will connect to the job market. That's our criteria. Now, we may be aiming 5 years down the road or 3 years down the road, but to us, it's inevitable that the institution is not going to hold the center ground in a person's life, and it's certainly not doing it in terms of taking care of the employment needs without some kind of technology that's going to assist along the way. Now, I want everybody to write this down. This is a revolution that's on its way. All right. So this is called u.com. So go to u.com. This is the beginning of an entirely new way to do search. So Google and Bing, the ones that have come out of the United States, those are based, I'm sure most of you know this, they're what would be called a popularity contest. So if somebody goes and looks up a paper on medieval pandemics and their effect on higher education, they're going to get to the results first that everybody else who's interested in that subject has gotten to. Okay, that doesn't mean that what's being looked at is worthy. It just means that it's popular. And if you, as many do, have suspicions that Google and the other search engines might be favoring people that advertise on their site, or organizations that do, that's a possibility. So this company, which is led by a very, very smart young German man who is one of the top cited people in artificial intelligence globally. He worked at our company here called Salesforce, which is a giant giant company of customer relations management, or CRM. They funded him to create a new kind of search engine that's based on high-level indexing. So what they do is they will take an area. So let's say it's computation down here at the bottom. They will go through with artificial intelligence and pull from the web and rank the best organizations or papers or whatever it might be in computation. They also will go out to other sources, and what they do, so you can see here, the computing magazine, PC Mag, or Reddit, which is a very common, interesting posting area, or Twitter, and they will go through and index those for the subject matters that are being looked at. They actually create apps. So we're involved with them right now in a very interesting project. And if anybody wants to get back in touch about U.com, please do. The idea is that an entire campus could be indexed. So let's say the University of Michigan. When a student goes and looks for something to work on, or to help them with a paper at University of Michigan, they most likely are going to just go to Google to start with. They may go to their library reserves if the faculty member has told them to, but they're going to go out on the web. When they do, they get to that long tail popularity contest. If University of Michigan indexed everything that's on their campus, there would be an app in U.com called UMich. They could go search in UMichigan first as they're writing their paper and probably discover faculty members and papers and things in the electronic library holdings that they had no idea were there. The same thing is true, is that they can index a subject area. So let's say it is medieval history. If they decided it was worth their while, they could index medieval history so that it would be ranked by a number of criteria that the AI would have been set against, including the popularity contest, but it would be very different. So I would suggest to you, it takes a little while to get used to using this system. I brought it to a good friend of mine who's at a computer science faculty member at Princeton University, and they now are making a special coding area where they're going to take not Princeton, but Rutgers University, and they're going to begin to index all the coding courses, all the coding information on the web that are related to those courses. So this company, U.com, is very interested in working with the higher education market. We're interested in the nonprofit to move away from search and really move into information indexing and information gathering, as opposed to what we get from Google. So take a look at U.com when you have a chance. It's unique. I'm pretty sure it's going to be something special. Again, I'm aiming, a year or two down the road. There's something else that's come up is that in the United States and in Europe, there has been leadership development and coaching for a long time in the corporate sector. So that in addition to how you advance in your job, the idea that you could have a neutral coach who works with you, who's been in that position before, is a rapidly growing field. It's a multi-billion-dollar field, and leadership development as well. I always have had, unfortunately to say, not a great opinion of leadership development. I wasn't sure what I was getting out of it, and I thought that coaching was mostly for CEOs. So this company approached us, and these are former people that worked at Google. When Google got to about 10,000 people, they realized they couldn't manage it without understanding how management works. A bunch of engineers could not run the company. So they started looking at how successful teams work and how successful coaching works. In Better Manager, again, they're servicing the corporate environment. They came to me and asked, would this be something that education institutions could use? And I said they certainly can, because it's not very clear in any education institution about how somebody progresses to a deanship, to a chair, to a vice president, or how somebody who is an assistant program manager goes up the ladder to a vice presidency. There's no clarity. It's as opaque as it gets. both on the academic side and on the administrative side. So I started talking to some of our campuses, but in addition, I asked them in the beginning, maybe they would want to sell this in their continuing education operations to companies that that are interested in improving their managers at the company. But every institution I spoke to said, we need this ourselves. We really need this, especially now when it's hard to know how to operate online. It's hard for a middle manager, and you could consider a dean or a chair, a middle manager, to manage up in their organization and to manage down and to be comfortable in their daily life and to have people work with them clearly. So I took this out to the market. The University of California, the system level, which is, you know, the Berkeley, UC San Diego, UC Irvine, the chancellor's office or the president's office at the UC office of the president is using this for a special group of women who were being counseled and coached to be able to have higher level positions in their institutions. University of California, Irvine has bought 500 seats to be able to take their deans, their aspiring faculty that want to go higher up in the organization, and are using it. And then one of our community colleges has now used it as part of their leadership development with their staff. So this is a very interesting company. They're global. The CEO is from France, and they're out there. Again, this is one, if somebody's interested in this, get back in touch. This, I think, will be very important. Human capital development within institutions has to be improved, and there's no clear way to do it. All right, and then this is something of pride and joy for me. This company services with online learning from multiple sources, people who are incarcerated, who are in our prisons and jails in the United States and Canada now, and some in the Caribbean. The reason I'm proud of this is my son's company. My eldest son, Noah, I had no expectation that he would ever do anything that was associated with something I'm doing, but it turns out he's built a system that I think is stellar. And in this case, he has a full learner record. I'm sure he'll tell you that had nothing to do with me. They're cloud and web organized. They will be looking at jobs for people who are coming out of institutions, correction institutions, and their software is very secure. So it takes in multiple online courses from many different providers. It provides them in the institution, and that person who is incarcerated gets their own learner record, which they can use against getting out of prison earlier. And they can use and transition to the workplace. So I'm very proud of what he's doing. He is in 3 countries now and is moving forward. So these are a handful of companies that I think meet the criteria of where the future is going. I might be wrong on some of them, but I think they're worthy, and all of them would be interested in having wider conversations. All right, to conclude, pandemics change education. We know things are not going back to normal, but the flip side of that is to think about how we can take advantage of this disruption. And as a culture, as people, as educators, as employers, think about how we can work better in a community. And that's going to involve better return on investment or return on purpose in the institutions. It makes clear that they're both academic and career options when we're involved with higher education, and we should pay attention to those so that we don't lose learners. Ed tech needs to move out of its own walled garden and into the open web. There's no easy way to do this because campuses are so used to buying products from vendors that they need. Products are needed. But it doesn't look like a holistic approach to how the web will be in the future. And then finally, learner accounts, apps are the future. I mean, we don't want rampant consumerism with individuals, but we certainly want them to have electronic rights that are equal to the rights they have elsewhere. So that's my talk, and I really appreciate having been given this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon. And I would like to ask if there is anyone who would like to ask. whether on site or online.
I have my email up here, both GoEducates and NLETS. And are you planning to put these slides in the program somewhere? If you are, then people might be able to have access to them later. I'm happy to receive email.
Yes, we will put all the slides, and also you can forward it to me. And also we will publish the recorded session.
All right.
The recorded keynote, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We also like to thank you, Mr. Freedman. Thank you for your valued contributions to us. If there's no other questions, I would like to say thank you on behalf of Turkish Gifted Children's Society. I think it was a great day. It was full of information on behalf of education. I hope tomorrow will be the same. Thank you so much again, and have a good night.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to go have breakfast now. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you, Gordon. So we will keep in touch. It was really very interesting and informative keynote speech. And we appreciate that you draw our attention to a number of, we can say, applications and websites, including GoEducate, U.com, Better Managers, Nucleus. And I think, participants and audience will try to make use of these platforms. Thank you again, and we are looking forward to meet with you.
All right, goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.